Good morning, Olive Branch family, and welcome to our online service. My name is Jeremiah. I'm the youth and young adults pastor here at the Olive Branch, and what an amazing series that we're in right now. The Chosen, falling in love with Jesus over and over again. Like, just such a powerful series, and we hope that you've been watching the episodes, and if you haven't, that's totally fine. You can watch them at tob.ca. There's a link there where you can watch the episodes for free. As well, on Tuesday nights, we meet together at 7 p.m. here at the church to watch the episode to following up or leading up to the sermon for the Sunday. So we encourage you to whether to watch it at home, watch it with some family, friends, whatever it might be, or join us as a church family here at the church. We extend that invitation to you. But Pastor Ken's got this message this Sunday. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait. But before we go into the message, our worship team is ready to lead us in song. So let's praise God. Let's worship His name. Have an amazing Sunday. God bless.
Your glory come Fish, wine, what will be next?
Any suggestions?
Anything and everything. Let's do this. I'll go with you to the ends of the earth.
I hope so, Simon. But I seem to remember there was a problem. Something about Andrew's feet.
Andrew's feet.
But first we must evaluate, no?
No, I can't.
I think we have to.
No, I can't.
Things even I cannot do.
We've been focusing on The Chosen, particularly the first season, and going through each episode. Hopefully you've watched episode 5 kind of in preparation for today, because we're talking about the wedding gift, the day that Jesus went to a wedding. Now, I've done a lot of weddings in my life, probably 250, I'm guessing somewhere in that range. Done a lot of weddings, and I know this. I know every bride and groom wants to have a perfect wedding. So I take some responsibility for that. I want to be well prepared for it and so on, and I want them to be prepared. Like I'll ask them, okay, if you have young children in the wedding, who are they going to sit with during the ceremony? Because kids have a way of wanting to steal the show. They stand up front, with everybody else and pick their nose or pull up their dress or do things like that, okay? So I ask, where are the kids going to sit? I sometimes ask, okay, you have any relatives that are like a little loose in the turn and they could come into the party or come into the wedding and they could mess things up. So I need to know that before I actually get started. Because lots of things can go wrong. I had a groom that kept fainting and we had to actually dismiss everybody and do a private ceremony. I had one where, the groom had a pigeon. It was an outdoor wedding, and the pigeon pooped on his face, So you just get lots of variables out there, especially when you do the weddings outdoors and in different ways. And this, of course, would have probably been a wedding that went outdoors. One couple in planning their reception, they went in and they were getting married a little bit later on in life, and they wanted to do something really special. So they said to the caterer, we want prawns. We want mountains and mountains of prawns. We love prawns, and we think our guests will too. So anyway, so the groom, they go to the wedding reception, and what they find is, these big stainless steel pans that they have all the stuff in, all the food in. They had pans and pans and pans with mountains of prunes. Somehow, the guy's British accent didn't quite get translated into prawns and so on. And he said it was a very moving ceremony, very moving reception, which you can understand. John tells a story of a wedding that was headed for disaster. And you have to understand that back in those days, weddings would many times last for days, sometimes a whole week, and so on. And to run out of wine at a wedding was like worst thing that could possibly happen. It was social disaster, and it would be remembered for years to come. And in case you haven't seen this episode, Jesus' mother and all of his disciples were invited to this wedding. It was in Cana, which is just a few kilometers from Nazareth. And so Jesus showed up. Seems like it was maybe a relative's wedding or at least a close friend's wedding. And so Mary says, hey, you got to help this couple out. They've run out of wine, and Jesus did, which raises all kinds of questions. Does Jesus use the power of God, to help out people at weddings? Now, what I love about this story, and you know it if you've seen it, that the Messiah is portrayed. He's the Son of God. He's the King of the universe. He's come to save everything, and he's just having a great time at this party. He's laughing, he's playing games with kids and stuff, and you just never think of Jesus as the Son of God as doing that. But he apparently liked parties, and people liked having him there, so he couldn't have been a party pooper, right? Nobody invites somebody to their party who's going to sit in the corner and frown at everybody if it looks like they're having fun. Jesus saved the wedding that day. So that's what you need to find out. That's what you see as you look at this and so on, that get used to different, because Jesus did things differently. And if you're going to follow Jesus, everybody else is going to probably be going in a different direction than you, and you have to get used to different. You have to go in a different direction if you actually want to follow him. Now, here's one of the core questions that I want to ask today. Does Jesus share my hang-ups? Like if I have hang-ups about things, and I think the music is too loud, or I think it has too many drums, or, I disagree with how somebody handles something and so on. Does Jesus share my hang-ups? Does Jesus share all my convictions? So that's a question you have to ask. Now, John, in kind of setting this up, he sets up really his whole account of Jesus, his eyewitness account, with these words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And then he makes it clear who this is. The Word became flesh. Aha, Jesus. And moved into the neighborhood, made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, what he's saying is, I watched all this. Like, I saw all this happen. And my goal, he says at the very end of his account, is I want you to believe in Jesus. And so these are some of the things that happened. And, of course, what happened was the wedding. This astounded everybody. Let me read the account for you. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities. So Jesus' mother told him, they have no wine. They have no more wine. Dear woman, that's not our problem, Jesus replied. My time has not yet come. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. And standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for the Jewish ceremonial washing. And each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. And when the jars had been filled to the brim, he said, now come and dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. And when the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. A host always serves the best wine first, he said. And then when everybody's had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you've kept the best until now. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, if you were raised in, kind of the form of the Christian faith that I was, you would know that, first of all, Jesus wouldn't have had long hair. Jesus wouldn't have danced at the wedding, and he certainly wouldn't have made wine for the wedding because those were taboo. That's where this question comes from. Does Jesus share my hang-ups? Is he hung up on the same things that I am? And if not, then where did the stuff that I believe in come from? Because, who created the list of rules that I was raised with if they're different from Jesus? Now, Jesus, I've heard different explanations of this. Well, it was actually just grape juice and just all kinds of stuff. I've heard all kinds of stuff, but it apparently was wine, because it says when people have had a lot to drink, they don't remember the last glass that they had, and, the taste doesn't particularly matter anymore. The core thing that we know about Jesus is that he does care more about the details of our lives than we would ever imagine, because he loves us, because he cares about all the details of our lives. Jesus tells us, though, that there are times in life that we don't have because we don't ask. And if Mary hadn't asked him to do this, it probably wouldn't have happened, Now, just a couple of things you may not know. The wedding celebrations back then in 30 AD, were, many times last for days and so on. So very big deal. And a wedding feast like this, if they ran out of wine, again, this would be social disaster. People would remember it for years to come. And the fascinating thing about this whole story is that Jesus cares about parties. And he was invited to a lot of parties. People invited him to things, and he would go into these parties, and sometimes the religious professionals would stand outside and scratch their heads and say, what is he doing here? And Jesus said, doctors come to heal the sick. He says, I've come not for the righteous, but I've come for the unrighteous. And people loved having him around. He was the most relationally intelligent person who ever lived. So if you want relationally intelligent people at your wedding or at your party, you would invite Jesus. Now, when Mary asked Jesus to help them with this problem, he seems a little reluctant, doesn't he? You know, he says, dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied, for my time has not yet come. So you look at this and you think, well, he's not calling her Ema, which you would have called your mom back then, and he's not calling her, he just calls her dear woman, which sounds a little bit distant. What you find out, though, if you look into the original languages, is that he was actually treating her with deep respect, okay, and honor. So he wasn't pushing her away. But what he was saying is that my mission, and they both knew what his mission was, my mission is different, and this needs to fit in with my mission, with what I'm hoping to do. And that's something that we need to consider when we ask Jesus for things too, right? You know, he loves us more than anybody else could, but his mission and what he is accomplishing in this world, what he's accomplishing in our family, what he's accomplishing in any circumstance may be different than what we're looking for. For example, I could ask God, to make me, the next president, of the United States after Joe Biden is done, and so on. And so I could say, Jesus, he told us, ask, seek, and knock. I'm a knocking on the door. I want to be president. And what he would likely say is something like this, Ken, first of all, this could corrupt you. Secondly, it's not your gifting. Third, you're too old. And fourth, Lori would kill you, which are all valid reasons. So that's what we have to consider when we ask Jesus to do something for us. Now, when Jesus said, my time has not yet come, it was an understanding that he and his mother had on that whole issue. Mary, when she first presented Jesus in the temple and Simeon came and blessed him and blessed her, he basically said, he's going to create a lot of problems. He's going to, bring a lot of people down, and there are going to be people who are out to get him, and there's going to be a sword that's going to pierce your soul too. So she understood that. She understood what his mission was. Now, when he says, my time has not yet come, what he's basically saying here, and this is so important to understand, that when he did his first miracle, this would start a clock ticking that would not stop ticking and not go off until he was hanging on a cross dead. So he understood the timing of this. So things started that day. Now, in the storyline of this that you're going to see in episode number 5, it's interesting that one of the disciples, Thaddeus, is talking to, I think it's Mary Magdalene, and he's a stone artisan, so he's talking about how these stone jars are made. And he said, it's interesting, when you make the first cut in the stone, he said, it kind of sets the destination for that whole piece of stone. And that's what Jesus was saying. He was basically saying, when I make the first cut, when I take the chisel, when we make the first cut with my life in terms of my mission, then all of a sudden, things are going to be determined from then on. Now, and that brings us into another brilliant facet of the miracle. Notice that what these stone jars were used for. Okay, so they used stone because of the fact that stone could not be contaminated, at least in their understanding. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Now, these things were expensive, as you can imagine. This wasn't like clay or ceramic, where you turn it on a wheel and then bake it. Like, these things had to be carved and chiseled out of a solid block of stone. They were a big deal, okay? And in the Jewish culture, ceremonial washing was a big deal. You read some of the things that Jesus had to say about this. They washed their hands before everything. And it wasn't just a matter of cleanliness. This was ceremonial washing, where they would just basically pour water over their hands and so on. So it wasn't about being unclean. It wasn't about contamination. It was about the ceremony of it. Now, doesn't it seem a little sacrilegious to you that Jesus would use these stone water jars used for ceremonial washing to create about 180 gallons of wine for a party? Well, maybe that was the point. Because what you find out is Jesus basically disassembling what was be the, probably the big four ideas behind the Jewish tradition up to that point. The first one was the Torah. Now, Jesus didn't contradict the Torah. What he basically said is, I've come to fulfill it. And he would say things like, well, you have heard that it was said. In other words, it's written in the Ten Commandments, to not murder somebody. But I'm telling you, don't get angry with them. So he had the power to change things. And also the traditions. Jewish traditions, which had basically been formed by the Pharisees and rabbis and so on back in that day, they just got crazy. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when it came to Shabbat or when it came to the Sabbath. 1,521 different rules around how to observe the Sabbath. Jesus went out of his way to do it, to blow it out of the water. They said, you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath because that's working. So Jesus, it was almost like he picked the Sabbath as the day when he was going to heal publicly and so on, and just basically kind of set them off. So he set them aside. Another issue is tribalism. Their thought was only Jews can be, given over to God. Only Jews are part of God's plan and so on. Jesus blew that out of the water. He included people who were Romans. He included, people who were pagans. He included Gentiles. He included everybody that they said shouldn't be included by his grace and by his favor. And then, of course, the last one was the temple. Temple was the place where you would go to meet with God or to find forgiveness of sins. Jesus, he said, not only claimed that he was God, he basically forgave people's sins without the temple. Now, you can understand, this was job security for the priests and for the Pharisees and everything. If he basically, overcame the temple, he basically said someone greater than the temple is here, referring to himself. And if he basically bypassed the temple, they were out of a job. Lots of people were out of jobs back then. Now, you can understand why Jesus got hunted down and eventually killed. When Jesus used these sacred, water jars to make wine for a wedding, he double-clicked on something that said relationships are more important than ceremonies and traditions. If you want to please God, love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love others as yourself. In fact, to be quite accurate to say that Jesus didn't just bypass religion. He did away with religion. Because he said this, he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And you could kind of typify it like this, okay? Jesus blew up religion. Only he can lead you to God. Only he can get you to heaven. And I'm telling you, you read through the Bible and you will never find a place that tells you that if you keep the Ten Commandments, you get to heaven. Or if you keep any rules, you get to heaven. And it's the same with every religion. We can get you close or we can point the way, but no one guarantees it. Jesus said, no one comes to the Father except through me. In a future session of The Chosen, Jesus goes after the Pharisees for their absurd traditions, implying that, if people followed them, that they would get to heaven. He says, woe to you, Pharisees and religious leaders. He says, this is basically about your egos. This is about you needing to be seen and needing to be admired, and your need to control people and make yourself seem more important than you really are. And there's one of these Pharisees who basically hisses, and he basically says, you need to stop right now. And Jesus said, oh, I'm just getting started. And he was. Maybe we need to take a closer look at some of our traditions. And think based on what Jesus did that day. Drinking wine, for example. I was taught, most of my life, at least the early part of my life, that drinking wine or any alcohol was always a sin. And then we would use that then to judge other people who drank wine. They can't possibly be Christians if they drink wine. Now, if I was raised like this, it's pretty clear from these eyewitness accounts that God himself, Jesus, Savior of the world, created enough sin for everybody at the party, 180 gallons worth, okay? That's a lot of wine. Now, what we know these days, for example, is that alcoholism is a big problem. People are using it to try and numb their pain. And some of you, maybe because of your past addictions or maybe because of your family history, you shouldn't touch a drop of it. You need to leave it alone because one glass of wine is never enough and it never will be. The problem the Pharisees and honestly all legalism has in common is that rules do not stop problems. They don't stop sin. We know that's true. You can make a law against lusting, but I'm telling you, it will still be there, no matter what. In Jesus' day, there was a group of people. They were called the bruised and the bleeding rabbis. So what they're thinking is okay, we don't want to lust, So whenever a woman would be coming their way, they would immediately close their eyes. They're called the bruised and bleeding rabbis because they'd inevitably trip over something or run into stuff. They were always banging themselves up, It's crazy. Rules and laws, don't stop lust. They don't stop drunkenness. They don't stop greed. They don't stop anger. Only the power of the Spirit working in us because of what Jesus went through on the cross can help us and help us to overcome these things. Two-step rule that Jesus gave is love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love other people as you love yourself. And that covers everything. And this covers, lust, it covers money, it covers shopping, obsession, with your cell phone, or whatever it happens to be, whatever you're having a problem with. This is the one command that covers that. One of the things that The Chosen is captured in this scene and that we have missed is, that Jesus, having fun for him was something that he apparently did. He had a good sense of humor and he was humble and so on. Like he's, dancing with them while they're dancing at the wedding and all the dancing songs that they used to do. He's, hugging his Ema, he's joking with Andrew because he doesn't know how to dance. He looks like a donkey walking on hot coals. And you think about it like this. One of the things that we most appreciate about people is their humor and their humility. Who do you think made us to appreciate things like that? Who do you think it is, that gave people, just this love for being together, this love for enjoying this kind of a party and dancing together and celebrating? Well, God gave us that, right? All of these things have been given to us by God. And there's something else that I see in this story that I love, and it's Jesus' generosity. And we see this in Jesus again and again. Let me read this one verse. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Now, can you imagine Jesus, bringing out the calculator and his cell phone and going out there and saying, okay, we got 79, 70, 80, 81, 80. We got 88 people here, so calculate that, okay. Let's say they're going to have 4 glasses of wine, of 4 ounces of wine each, for the party. That's enough. They shouldn't need more than that. So he's going through his calculator or, abacus or whatever they used back then, and he's, parceling it all out so that there's just enough. That's not the way Jesus works. Jesus goes out to a hillside where 5,000 hungry people need to be fed. He takes a little boy's lunch, and he multiplies the thing, I don't know how much food he created, but it was tons of food, and there was enough for everybody to eat. And then it says that there were 12 baskets of leftovers that the disciples gathered up. He, again, multiplied food for a crowd of 4,000, same thing, bread and fish. And it says that there were 7 huge baskets of leftovers picked up. Jesus is the God of plenty. Jesus, represents a God who is not the God of scarcity. Like pinch every penny as it goes out of your pocket, Make sure you don't pay somebody too much. Make sure you don't tip too much. Just squeeze, 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 scrimp, scrimp. He is not a God of scarcity. He is the God of abundance. And he doesn't prefer dark colors over light colors. He doesn't prefer, burlap over satin. He doesn't prefer, straw hats over fedoras. He cares about all. He's the one that gave us the capacity to, taste the distinctions between things and to see different colors and to feel the difference between fabrics. He's given us that gift. He's a God of abundance and not scarcity. And this wine, it wasn't cheap. Like he didn't just water it down, This was the best wine the people had ever tasted. And that typifies who God is and what he's like. Now, there's a comment at the end of this story that I want to show you. John writes this. He says, what Jesus did in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. What we find as we carry on with Jesus' story here in the book of John is that everything is a sign. It's important for people to understand what he is saying about himself. You come into Markham and you'll see the sign, City of Markham, 352,000, even if there are probably way more than that now. The sign is just basically saying, this is a signpost, this is telling you that something important is happening at this particular boundary line. This was just the first one. Grapevines, I mean, they turn water into grape juice or into grapes all the time, and then the grapes have to be pressed, and then the wine has to be fermented and different things added to it and so on before it's wine. Jesus just bypassed that whole process. He is the master of quality. He can turn water, stone jars of water, into wine, the very best of wine. He's the master of quality. This is just the first of the signs, you know. Without getting into a bunch of detail, there are 7 signs in John's account. The next sign actually happens in chapter 4, and it talks about Cana. It's talking about an official in Canaan, a government official in Cana. He was apparently a Roman officer of some kind, and he comes to Jesus and asks him to heal his son, heal his servant. And Jesus said, go home. He says he's going to be alive. So Jesus is not just the master of quality, he is also the master of distance. He's the master of space. He doesn't have to be there to actually touch somebody. He can heal people far away. He's also the master of time. You remember that Jesus meets a guy down at the pool of Bethesda. This guy's been there 38 years. 38 years. Jesus comes up to him and he says, do you want to be well? And of course the guy wanted to be well. Jesus is the master of time. This man had been suffering for 38 years. In John chapter 6, you find them, talking to people. We'd already talked about this miracle. And they're out on the hillside. They're all hungry. So Jesus takes a little boy's lunch and feeds them all. He's the master of quantity. And then you go on and you find out that they cross the Sea of Galilee. They're going to the other side. And the disciples are in the boat. They're scared to death. They see Jesus. He's actually walking on the water. And then he calms the storm, which is basically rebuking it like it's a nasty kid, So he's the master of nature. He's the Lord of all nature. In John chapter 9, there's a guy that he finds who's blind. And so the disciples say, who sinned? Was it this guy or was his parents who sinned? And Jesus said, no, neither one of them sinned. It says this in John chapter 9, verse 3. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. Whatever misfortune, Jesus is Lord over misfortune because God was at work in this. And then, of course, John chapter 11 tells the story of Lazarus. Most of you are familiar with that story. Mary and Martha, they send word to Jesus that Lazarus is sick and he needs to come right away, but he doesn't come right away. And this is odd because you think, well, Jesus, they're really, really close friends, so he should run up there immediately and go and heal this guy, but he doesn't. Then they find out he's died. So by the time Jesus gets there, Lazarus has been in the grave for 4 days. So, Martha is the one, she's kind of the one that kind of calls him out and says, don't open up this grave. He's going to be smelling by now. Jesus calls him out of the grave. And it's really clear that Jesus is master. He is Lord over all sickness and over all death. That's good news, isn't it? That's really good news. Jesus is the Lord of all things. And when you find out when he steps into this situation where there's no wine, all of a sudden, the people who are holding the feast, the groom's family, they're about to be humiliated. And all of a sudden, Jesus changes all that. Jesus honors his mom, and she steps in to try and help, and he honors her, There's the MC of the banquet saw something go on where they handed him this glass of water. The servants are afraid they're going to be humiliated by handing him a glass of water. They're thrilled when it turns out to be the best wine ever. And he himself announces it at the banquet, And Jesus' first disciples, and the overall goal of this is that they are filled with belief. They believe in Jesus. And it starts a process where they go through all of these signs and they see Jesus for the next 3 years. And it changes their lives to the point where they will say, you can kill us, but it doesn't change our testimony. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Christ. And what's clear about Jesus when you watch him is that he changes everything. When he steps into the room, when he steps into any circumstance, things change. The unexpected happens. He's the master of quantity. He's the master of quality and space and time and misfortune and death. And you will want him with you wherever you go. And he will travel with you. He will go with you wherever you are. But believing him is the key. I've done a lot of funerals over the years, just like weddings. I've done a lot of funerals, And I tell you, when I walk into a funeral, when somebody has believed in Jesus, who is the master of death and the master over misfortune and the master of all things, man, I'll tell you what, it makes the funeral a lot easier because I can tell those people, like, you need to understand that this person you're grieving today, they're doing just fine. Something isn't lost when you know where it is. We're grieving because we're left. It brings hope into every situation. I've been with people who've gone through horrible things. And when you believe that Jesus is the master of misfortune, even if you don't understand what's happening in your life, he does. And he's at work in those circumstances. Shepherd's Psalm is really and ultimately about Jesus as the good shepherd. And this is what it says. It says this: you anoint my head with oil. You bless me with all kinds of good things. My cup overflows. And surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. That's how you can tell who belongs to the good shepherd. Because when God pours things into their lives, that goodness and that grace and that kindness gets splashed over everybody that comes into their path. They leave things better than they found them. So here's my thought. When we as followers of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus, but you expect that, if we're going to show up, that you ought to be able to think, it's a good thing that they were here. It's a really good thing that they were here. I'm sure that the groom of this wedding, man, good thing Jesus was here. He changed the day for us. And that should be true. See, when I walk out of a room, I don't want people saying behind me, man, I'm glad he's gone. Gee, he's such a hang-up, such a party pooper. I don't want that, and it shouldn't be that way. I want goodness and love to pour out of my life and to make a difference. See, grace and love and kindness and generosity and patience, and acceptance and respect are what Jesus asks of us. And we need time to grow in that. We need time for the Spirit of God to form those things in us. It just takes time because it doesn't happen automatically. That's what we ought to bring wherever we find ourselves. In his book, The Kingdom of God is a Party, Tony Campolo talks about a very unusual place where he found himself one evening, and I want to close with his story. Apparently, he was in Hawaii, Honolulu, and the time difference between Honolulu and Philadelphia kind of left him awake in the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning, starving, So he decided to go out and see if he could find some place that was open and get something to eat. And the only place he could find that was still open at 3:30 was this diner, okay? We used to call them greasy spoons, because you had to make sure that your donut didn't have legs on it and kind of walk off the counter. So you've probably been there. So he's sitting there at 3:30 in the morning when a group of prostitutes, several prostitutes, walked in. They're talking loud, chewing gum, One of them, Agnes, says something like this: hey, tomorrow's my birthday, One of the other girls said with kind of a sneer, yeah, so what, What do you want from us, a birthday party or something, You want us to sing happy birthday? And Agnes said, of course not. I never had a birthday party in my life. After they left, Tony asked the restaurant owner if they came in about the same time every night. And he said they did. So Tony said, well, why don't we have a surprise birthday party for Agnes? I'll decorate, and the restaurant owner, agreed that he would, bake the cake and he'd make sure everybody knew that the party was going to happen. So the next night, Tony came in at 2:30 in the morning, and he decorated that little diner from top to bottom. And the word spread fast, and by 3:30 in the morning, most of the red light district in town had jammed themselves into this little diner. So when Agnes showed up, everyone yelled, surprise, happy birthday, Agnes. And Agnes was totally stunned. Her mouth fell open, her knees buckled, and then as they all sang happy birthday, she just totally lost it and sobbed. When they were done singing, the owner said, hey, Agnes, he says, you got to blow out the candles and cut the cake. Come on, yeah, Agnes, we all want some cake. Blow out the candles. If you don't do it, I'm going to have to do it. When Agnes had recovered a bit, she picked up the cake and stared at it and said, look, Harry, is it okay if can I just look at it a little bit longer before we cut it up? And Harry shrugged and says, sure. You want to keep the cake and take it home? And Agnes said, can I? And she picked up the cake and carried it out of that little diner like it was the Holy Grail. Then everybody just kind of stood there in stunned silence, and Tony didn't know quite what to do, so he prayed. He prayed for Agnes that God would bless her and that she would enjoy her birthday and that she would know that God loved her. And he prayed for everyone in the diner that they would find God, that they would find him to be a God who cared about them. So when he was done praying, Harry, leaned over the counter and squinted at Tony. He says, "Hey," he said, "you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to?" When he was done, Tony said, "I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning." And the guy said, "No, you don't. There's no church like that. If there was a church like that, I'd be a part of a church like that. I'd join a church like that." Whenever Jesus showed up, love and kindness and goodness spilled out of him, and it didn't matter where it was. Whether it was at the wedding, or whether it was at the temple, or whether it was at the party that they had for Matthew in his house. He showed up in some surprising places. He did some surprising things. He showed up at a wedding, and all of a sudden there was plenty of wine, and nobody got humiliated. He said he'd come to bring good news to the world. He didn't come just to bring good news and tell everybody that he was going to give his life for them. He was good news wherever he went, because he changed things wherever he went. He told his followers that there are going to be bland places and you'll bring flavor to them. There are going to be places that are filled with decay. And like salt, you're going to start the process of preserving. There are going to be places where people are stumbling around and you'll need to bring light. There are places that are in shades of black and white and you're going to have to bring color to them. Be good news wherever you are. And our calling as followers of Jesus, as people who imitate him, as people who do the things that he did, is to be good news wherever we find ourselves, to be good news. And that shows the glory of God. Let's pray. God, help us to simply be good news, to live good news, to love even when we don't feel like it, to care even when we don't feel like it, to give even when we don't think we can afford it. Help us to be good news wherever we find ourselves and be like Jesus. Amen. And so may God give you the opportunity this week to light up some dark corner where you find yourself, to bring hope and surprise and goodness to a place that doesn't have any. Amen.